It's Sunday, May 18, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News. Our guest today is a renowned psychologist specializing in borderline personality disorder. He's also host of the Shrinking Trump podcast. Dr. John Gartner, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Well, thanks for having me.
John, recently you wrote that the press has sane-washed Trump's dementia and mental illness.
Yes.
This is, the media obviously plays such a big role in communicating Donald Trump's behavior. Just talk to that if you can for a moment.
Well, I remember before the election when we were pointing out the really blatant signs of dementia in Trump, both in terms of the progression of it, in terms of his deterioration in language, in reasoning, even in his physical gait. We pointed out all these things, and we pointed out the way in which his thoughts could meander from fantasy to reality, the perfect example being when he's talking about Hannibal Lecter. First he's talking about, all these immigrants, they're coming from insane asylums. Hey, that reminds me, anyone seen Silence of the Lambs? Because in other words, it's a movie about an insane asylum. And then he says, the late, great Hannibal Lecter, they don't like you to talk about him anymore. He's confusing whether he's a fictional character, he's a real person who died, versus when he's actually a fictional character, who he only thought of because he thought of a movie that basically had the same word as insane asylum. We're starting to see those patterns of thinking now. And this is what we warned would happen if someone with dementia got into the White House. He's not going to get better. In fact, he's going to get worse. So in addition to all the things we can say about his malignant narcissism, which is enough for us to be highly alarmed, we're also seeing exactly what we predicted we would see if this happened. Most recently, right, his confusion of Harvard and Harlem. I don't know if you've shown that clip on the show, but you should show it, where he's asked a question, a very serious question about some people are saying your attack on Harvard is an attack on academic freedom. Well, what would you say to them? And he'd say, there were riots in Harlem, and it's an African-American reporter. That may be something that made him think about Harlem, but also Harlem sounds like Harvard. And he's talking about Harlem and the black vote that he got, and then he goes back to Harvard and says, but they're protesting for Harvard, in Harlem, so he's now he's doing the weave, because he's coming back to. So it's not like he just misheard the word, like, I thought you said Harlem, the one word just made him think of another word that sounded like that, okay, and then he had a whole series of associations about black people in Harlem and getting the black vote. Okay. And then he sort of remembered it was a question about Harvard, and then he kind of mixed them up together. So the two stories were kind of part of one narrative. Right. This is the level of thinking, right, that we're talking about. And when you talk about sane washing, the part of the interview that I like the best is while he's talking, the camera is actually on the reporters. There's like 3 reporters on a stage. I forget what channel it was. And we're just hearing him on the telephone, and you're looking at their faces, right, while he's talking, and it's like you can tell that their mind is going, holy shit, what the, what the F is this?
But they don't say anything, do they? I mean, this is the issue. There is total radio silence from these people.
Exactly.
And to the extent that they're not even working as a collective. We saw that when the AP and Reuters were banned from the press room, that that was a moment when it would have been a good idea for them all to come together and make a stand, but they failed to do that. And I guess that goes back to media ownership and the fragmented nature of American news networks, and the fact there's so many right-wing networks covering him. But So without it being called out and people just playing along, that's just Trump, right, that becomes even more problematic, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, it adds to the whole level of insanity, comedy and danger, all at once. Like to most recently, the Alcatraz follies. I don't know if you followed this, but he just announced one day from the Oval Office, we're going to reopen Alcatraz, and everyone's going like, what the F? What do you mean reopen Alcatraz? I mean, they closed it for...
He'd seen the movie 2 days earlier.
No, he saw the movie 2 hours before he put out the tweet that we're going to reopen Alcatraz. Okay. So in other words, this is how impulsive he is. He sees something on TV and just decides that that Alcatraz was so great, we should bring back Alcatraz, a symbol of law and order. But then when he announces it, okay, he says, well, I guess I'm going to be in the movie business, because I always knew I'd be in the movies. And it's like, wait, so are we taking now a 40-year-old museum and turning it into a prison, or are we making a movie about a prison, or are we making it into a prison because you saw a movie, or is it some weird combination? And again, that weave, right? He's sort of weaving the reality of a movie about Alcatraz and actually using Alcatraz, and they're kind of blurring together in his mind, but he's making these childish, impulsive decisions. Something like 47 people he's appointed are Fox News personalities.
Yeah.
In other words, everything he ever, that book, Everything I Ever Needed to Learn, I learned in kindergarten or whatever, anything he ever needed to know about the world, he's seen on Fox TV.
On Fox, yeah. But so there's two aspects to this, which I think people maybe find confusing. There's the personality disorder. There's clearly the malignant narcissism. There's that stuff which goes, I presume, into the mental health category. But there's the dementia, which is a physiological disease, and that's in a different category, isn't it? And so what you're describing would be familiar to anybody who's looked after an elderly relative who had dementia. And I often hear from in the comments, people write, yes, my grandmother had this, or my parent had this, and I recognize this behavior precisely.
Exactly.
So let's just focus on the dementia before we move to the mental health section. And because, this is a real kind of, if you don't believe in, a lot of people, some people, I should say, don't buy into mental health analysis. They just don't go there. They're of a different generation, or they can't admit they have their own problems. But when it comes to dementia, it's a real tangible thing that everybody is touched by in some way through family or friends and connections.
Yeah.
And yet there is almost no media coverage that includes the word dementia or any of this kind of clinical aspect to his mental ability. Why is that?
Well, somebody from I think it was Michael Tomlinson Tomasky from the New Republic coined this term sane washing. And I think it really is a great term, which is they take this crazy material or this thought disordered material and they show a snippet of it. And then they have people sort of interpreting it as, as if it's 4-dimensional chess, when it's more like there was some New Yorker cover when all these other leaders are playing 4-dimensional chess and he's playing like Hungry, Hungry Hippo,
Literally.
But also just what we talked about, where he can even be blatantly thought disordered, and everyone can just sort of, it's the emperor's new clothes, almost. I'll give you another example, recent example, right? This whole thing with the Declaration of Independence. Yeah. Right. If anyone, you should show that.
This was in the ABC interview, and he was basically, it was on the wall. He was in the Oval Office with the reporter, and the reporter said, "What does that document mean to you?"
And he says, well, just what it says. It's a Declaration of Independence, and it's about love. It's about unity. It's about very important. And one of the things that happens when people have dementia is they use what are called superlatives, right? So if they really, as filler words, like if they really don't know what something is, they say, well, it's wonderful. It's amazing. This happened to him at Gettysburg. Right, when they asked him, well, what's the meaning of Gettysburg? He said, well, it was terrible and also beautiful and wonderful. And, Gettysburg, wow. And he really didn't know what the battle of Gettysburg. He couldn't put a thought together literally could not put a thought together that he could attach to Gettysburg. So he just uses these superlatives. It's like, it was beautiful. I mean,
Yeah.
and the Declaration of Independence, and it's funny, you never hear him use the words love or unity, because I think he is truly the Grinch. In fact, in that interview with Christian Welker, at one point he said, well, you said that you would love all the people. He said, wait, I said that? Like he wanted to deny that he said he would love all the people. But he's talking about it as being a document of love and unity. If there's anything the Declaration of Independence is not about, it's love and unity. We're telling England that we're breaking up with you.
Yeah.
And that's going to start a war.
But do you think he would have known the answer 30 years ago? Or do you think he also would have played for time? Because, the other aspect, mental health over here, dementia over here, but there's something else, and that is lack of intellect. He doesn't read. He is not somebody who has knowledge. And so, there is also, this is why I guess it's so confusing to kind of nail him down, because all of these things could be correct.
You put your finger on something very important, actually. To diagnose dementia, you need to show a pattern of deterioration. And for that, you need to know someone's baseline, right? Because one man's baseline could be another man's deterioration,
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I could have dementia if I came down to your level. No, I'm only joking. But everything's relative. Okay. Well, we really have done studies comparing him to his younger self. Particularly with regard to language. So he's gone from using like an 11th grade vocabulary to a 4th grade vocabulary, but also real signs of thought disorder and dementia in his speech start appearing, which you actually didn't see in Biden's speech. And you just see all of these, they actually had Stat Magazine did this. They had a group of neuroscientists and neuroclinicians read speeches he did in the 80s and then read speeches that he'd done. And they really determined that there had been organic deterioration. They could see it clinically in terms of his sentence structure and the unity of his thought, how tangential his thought was. How he just kind of tangentially goes from one thing to another, or he just starts saying his usual shibboleths over and over again. But he really has trouble keeping a line of thought together. He really just kind of blends from one thing to another. So the Harlem-Harvard thing is sort of a blatant example, but he's kind of doing it in little ways a lot of the time. He just follows this kind of weird chain of associations and then just ends up at one of his usual depots. But it's masking a real breakdown in his ability to think. And yet, if you see interviews of him in the 80s, he spoke in polished paragraphs. He was quite articulate. He seemed charming. He always was intellectually lazy, but he actually was not stupid. He may have gotten into these Ivy League schools because of his parents' connections, but he actually is smart. He was smart once, believe it or not. He has really deteriorated.
A phrase that I'm hearing from him a lot now is, I don't know. And that came you mentioned the NBC interview. He was asked about whether he should be upholding the Constitution, which is something he swore an oath to. And he looked around and said, I don't know, you'll have to ask the lawyers.
Yeah.
How much of that would you say is dementia versus authoritarianism?
Well, it really is an amazing blend of both. It's almost the authoritarian using the dementia. I don't know.
Convenient.
I forgot. I was supposed to defend the what? The Constitution? Right. So, also it does have almost a kind of mobster kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
Understatement, which I don't know means kill the guy, But
he just seemed pretty vacuous to me in that moment. It was almost as if he was sundowning.
He does sundown. That's one of the things that we noticed, that his thought disorder would get worse later in the day, especially when he did night rallies. And the other thing in that interview, I noticed he looked kind of hunched over.
Right.
I think a lot of what's going on now is he's assembled such an army of winged monkeys, such an army of psychopathic, true believers that they can wreak havoc on their own. That's where Elon Musk was. The analogy I used is that Trump was sort of like the wizened emperor in the Star Wars, you know what I mean? And then Musk was sort of like Darth Vader, the manic guy with all the energy and the sword is just going to come and blow up planets, on behalf of the Sith emperor.
The emperor gave them all license to be as bad as they could possibly be. And but we're seeing that now with this cast of characters, aren't we? From everyone from Tom Homan to Kristi Noem, their use of language, it's almost like they have been told, close the drawbridge, like you have carte blanche to basically be as evil and cruel as you want. And that has come from the top.
Exactly. So he's empowered them. He doesn't have to be moving the pieces around on the board day by day. But on his own, he gets into trouble. On his own, he'll just, who changed the tariffs or, so it's not like other people are pulling the strings. No, he's just making trouble like spontaneously, but he's empowered these people who are working a system, the Project 2025 team, right? All these people now are really the most corrupt actors, right? The Fox News hosts and the right wing, shills and the Project 2025 people. It's like they're running a play, and it's all about destroying the Constitution, right? And that's what's really frightening.
He doesn't seem to have the energy for it this time around, does he? He really is pretty exhausted, and he would obviously rather be playing golf. And I think the statisticians have said it's around 50% of the time he's on the golf course. But he doesn't seem to have the attention span for any subject. He just wants it to kind of finish up. He's like, he's just exhausted. It seems mentally exhausted.
Right. Well, there you go.
I mean, the diagnosis is pretty clear. There's just no one to do it, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, you think this group is going to, 25th Amendment him? It's going to be the Weekend at Bernie's White House eventually. It's going to get more and more comedic as they sort of prop him up. And I sort of feel like now being with Trump, it's like doing improv, right? You just have to say yes and, so it's like if he says that something crazy, you just go, okay, yeah, and, Alcatraz, yeah, let's do it.
But world leaders have cottoned onto this, haven't they? And they're having to play him, because talking with him, as Volodymyr Zelensky will tell you, is like treading on eggshells sometimes. So they all have learnt to kind of give him a shit sandwich. They tell him how great he is, then they'll kind of slip in the thing that they need, and then tell him how great he is again. It really is as simple as that. Like, we are watching him being played in real time by all of the dignitaries and world leaders who are having to negotiate.
Well, yes and no. I think he's being played by the people who he's making corrupt deals with. I think he's doing the bidding of Vladimir Putin and anybody who wants to buy Trump meme coins. So I think in that sense, he's very happy to do the bidding. I think what you'll see, we actually went over this in Shrinking Trump. Harry did this, or my co-host, Harry Siegel, did a really great job of taking some of these Oval Office meetings with dignitaries and really breaking them down into different parts. We just did the one with the Prime Minister of Canada. And at first he's very charming, actually, but actually subtly passive-aggressive, because he said, oh, well, you were losing by a lot, but I won that election for you. Well, actually, because there was a wave of anti-Trump sentiment that pushed the liberal over the top.
And still Trump thought that was a win for him. That's what's so weird about that.
Well, because you have to think about the psychology of the malignant narcissist, right? He needs to demean and degrade, right? All of these people. That's why he loves tariffs. We think, this is Harry's theory, and I think he's right, that he loves tariffs because it's like a way of punishing everybody and saying, I'm so powerful, and now you're all going to have to come crawling on your knees to me for a deal. Right. Like I'm the potentate, and you're all going to have to come, petitioning the king, right? And that's the way he's treating them. So first he was very charming, but actually it's kind of one of those a compliment that's really an insult, because he's saying you were behind by a lot. I mean, you were really, it was like one of the biggest comebacks ever, because of me. But
so he breaks things and then tries to take credit for fixing them. I mean, because, last week he did the deal with the UK, which was basically just, he broke the deal and then he just fixed the deal. Nothing really changed. And then he called it an historic event. And even the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, had to kind of acknowledge that it was an historic event, but actually it wasn't really anything. There was no details. The whole thing was performative because Trump was desperate for a win, because he's not been able to do any other deals with any other nation.
No, I mean, what he's done is literally cut off all the circulation of commerce, between America and the entire planet, and then said, don't worry about it. We're building our own factories. That's what he said to the Prime Minister of Canada. At the end, this is what I was trying to say. In the end, he really, well, first of all, before he came, he insulted him on social media. So he's already coming, having been insulted.
That's right, yeah.
But in the end, I'm blocking on his name now, even though I talked about him yesterday. Mark Carney, thank you. Yeah. That he was saying, look, really, we're your biggest customers, and it's really, we make cars together. They wrote half built here, half built there. We're working together as a team. And Trump said, we don't want your cars. We don't want any cars made in Canada. We don't want anything from you. We don't need anything from you. Like we don't need. And he went through different product. We don't need that. We don't need that. We're making steel. So we don't need your steel. We're building new steel mills right here at home. No, we're not.
No.
So what do we? And then I showed Doug Ford saying, no, actually, they need our steel. We're like X percent of the steel. Actually, we're like 82% of the nickel that they use in their their high tech machinery. And he went on and on of all the ways. No, we're actually dependent on Canada. What do you mean we don't need you? Yes, we do need you, Canada.
The word that he keeps going back to when it comes to Canada is obviously something that he'd read, and the word, or not read because he doesn't read, but had heard, is lumber. And I don't know if you noticed as I did, but his obsession with we don't need their lumber, it was almost as if psychologically, just from an analysis perspective, that he thought he'd found a word that no one else knew. And therefore he was educating people that lumber is a word a bit like groceries.
I was going to say, that groceries, again, just a little blip, right?
Yeah.
But like you said, like he's discovering the word groceries, and he goes, groceries. Remember when groceries used to be a thing? I ran on groceries.
And people never use that word until I use that word.
But the other thing is, he's driving home this thing about Canada being the 51st state. It's the other way he's insulting this world leader and trying to show dominance over him, right? And he does it by using the questions. He's very good at using the question and answer sessions in the Oval Office to actually hurl insults at the leader. So they ask him about the 51st state thing, and so he goes on and on and on about it. And you can see Carney is actually, you can see he's like an inner torment, it's like, again, the facial reactions, right, of these people who see him being insane.
It was the same face that Zelensky pulled, they whoever goes into that room knows that they're going to end up with that face.
Right. Exactly.
Mark Carney, who, I mean, I have experience of him when he was governor of the Bank of England in the UK, is a very serious person, but he's a highly intelligent operator. And, he clearly knew what he had to do in order to kind of get through that. And he gave his own press conference afterwards where he was asked about what was going through his mind. And he said, I really hope you don't know what was going through my mind. But he is somebody who, he has to work with America. Like the two countries are intrinsically linked. So he's almost stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea.
Right.
And so it just seems that humoring Trump and going through this process of being temporarily humiliated and hopefully coming out the other side without too many bruises is really the only way to play him right now.
But the problem with a bully is, then they want more.
Right.
Then they want you to rub out your best friend, Yeah. It starts with little favors.
Right.
Then they want you to declare an investigation into your political opponent, or what I mean? Or declare the election being fraudulent. This is the problem with gangster corruption, right?
So it'll become more sinister.
Much more sinister. I mean, David Brooks put it very well. He said, Trump is not transactional. He's someone who actually uses extortion, which is different. A transaction is like, look, we make a transaction, we both leave happy. Extortion is you do what I want or I'm going to hurt you. Yeah. And then I want more from you. and then I want more from you. Yeah, and you're going to do it because you're afraid I'm going to hurt you. So it's just that simple and that primitive. And that's really the whole thing of what it's about. So what the problem with giving into extortion. And by the way, this is why we're going to lose the trade war to China, because they understand what's going on here. And they actually put out a little propaganda video. I don't know if you saw it on social media. We showed it on the show. It was very well done. And actually, by the end of it, you're completely convinced that they are right.
Yeah.
But they're saying, look, there's no point in feeding a bully. It's like drinking poison to slake a thirst. And so we're just not going to play. We're not going to negotiate. We're not going to. And now the container ships, they're not even stopping at the port of Los Angeles. They're literally passing on because they have no Chinese goods to unload. So there's no reason for them to make a stop. So the Chinese are saying, oh, you want to disrupt trade between our countries? Which country do you think is more capable of absorbing economic suffering? The 1,000-year kingdom, or the spoiled, United States citizens who, when Christmas time comes, are going to see empty shelves. And we're already calling him Donnie Two Dolls.
That's right.
Because
who needs 31 dolls? I mean, you just don't need that many dolls.
We'll explain to our children at Christmas time that we all have to make a sacrifice for Trump's fatherland. And I'm sure they'll all understand.
It's the patriotic thing to do, John.
Exactly.
Clearly. We have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and move our attention over to the mental health side and talk about the personality disorder and how that might have shifted in recent weeks. We'll do that next on The Weekend Show. Do you ever think about how much of your life you actually spend sleeping? It's about a third. That's a lot of time to be laying on something that could be full of toxins or worse, heating you up at night. That's why I switched to an avocado mattress. They're made with certified organic latex, wool and cotton, no chemicals, no weird off-gassing, just clean, cool, naturally breathable comfort. And honestly, it feels like luxury without the guilt. My personal favorite, the Avocado Green Mattress. It's their bestseller for a reason. Super comfy, supportive, and I wake up actually feeling rested. Plus, I know it's sustainably made, ethically sourced, and built to last. Avocado is mission-driven sustainability at its best. Better for you, better for the planet. Shop now at avocadomattress.com and save up to $200 on certified organic mattresses. Dream of better. Did you know that when your metabolism is working properly, you will feel the benefits in literally every aspect of your life? I have found a valuable tool that gives me insights to create a healthy metabolism for my body. It's called Lumen. It's the world's first handheld metabolic coach, a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs. It gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workouts, sleep, and even stress management. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fats or carbs. Then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. And Lumen will give you tips to keep you on top of your health game. Your metabolism is your body's engine. It's how your body turns the food you eat into the fuel that keeps you going. And because your metabolism is at the center of everything that your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, and better sleep. Take the next step to improving your health. Go to lumen.me/weekend to get 20% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/weekend for 20% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. When you start a podcast, it seems like you have to figure it out all by yourself. Scripts, setup, filming schedule, logos. It can be super overwhelming, and every day seems to introduce a new decision that needs an answer. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can start to begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand's style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. Shopify.com/weekend. We're back on The Weekend Show with Dr. John Gartner. I'm Anthony Davis. So we spent the first part talking about the dementia and the clear signs that you know he is effectively rotting. I mean, it's what it is, isn't it? He is dementing, and no one's calling it out. The media aren't calling it out. And he went for his fitness test recently, didn't he? Where he got not just the best marks, but the highest marks of any person who's ever done the test. Maybe we should just talk to that for a moment before we get into the mental health side, although this is clearly a mental health issue. He's not tested by anybody independent, really, is he? I mean, he's only ever going to be surrounded by Republicans, a Republican doctor, a MAGA Republican doctor. So you're never going to get to hear what we need to hear.
Well, I mean, Ronnie Jackson, I think the Ronnie Jackson story, really, I was sort of involved with that, actually. So I was up close to that. Remember that he gave Donald Trump a cognitive screening. We actually started our Duty to Warn group kind of started with Tom Steyer, actually, a whole public relations campaign to pressure them to give that cognitive screening because of the signs of cognitive decline that he was showing. And amazingly, they did it. But it always pissed him off that he had to take that. So he used to go around the country bragging about how he got the highest score that anyone's ever seen. And it's like a genius. They've never seen anything like it. Well, it's completely ridiculous. It's a test that if you don't get a perfect score, it means you're incapable of living independently and may need to be institutionalized. I mean, it's really a test for pretty advanced dementia. It's like, can you point out which one of these three animals is the lion? It's not. It's not the Mensa test. But I think his bragging about it was such a narcissistic injury that he has to keep bringing it up and talking about how superior he is, and just like he has to keep talking about how dumb Biden is and how dumb everyone else is, because he's the one that knows he's dumb and he needs to project that outward. And that's what this personality disorder does. They project onto others anything that feels weak or bad in themselves, and so basically. It really is. You have to learn the code. It's opposite speak, right? Whatever they're saying about their opponents is true about themselves. I mean, you could literally go through so many things that he said and just opposite speak it, right? Just change the pronouns. It's not that complicated. It's like Pig Latin. It's not that hard to translate. Right? Just switch the pronouns from you to me, or him to them to me.
Yes. Well, a smart person doesn't tell you they're smart, and in the way that a kind person doesn't tell you they're kind. But he's constantly telling us who he wants us to think he is.
And he's like, and what he's accusing the Democrats of is what he's actually doing. They're trying to rig the election because he's trying to rig the election. It's just every example that you can think of. And now they're going to persecute the people who investigated his trying to rig the election. But that's, I think, more political. But the other thing about malignant narcissists is the more success they have, according to Eric Fromm, who developed the diagnosis, the more psychotically grandiose they become. In other words, their success, they drink their own Kool-Aid, as it were, and their success makes them, like throwing gasoline on a fire. in terms of their grandiosity. What you're not supposed to do with the barbecue grill, and sometimes people get impatient. Fuck it, I'm just going to, and then the whole thing's like whoosh. Okay, that's what we're doing with his grandiosity. I think this whole thing of him posting the picture of himself dressed as the Pope, first of all, he said it on camera. That who should be the next Pope? Because I should be the next Pope. He just said it. He didn't say it with any irony, right? Or wisecrack, or wink, wink. Or he just said that. I think
But that was an impulse reaction, wasn't it? Because of the grandiosity.
Because of the grandiosity. In other words, he actually thinks that, and then he actually tweeted out this picture of himself arrayed as the Pope from his own personal account. It wasn't like even a retweet. So this is crazy, right? But think about it. It's really sort of like Louis saying he's the sun god. You know what I mean? I mean, it's that level of crazy grandiosity.
And so, we've crossed the Rubicon so many times with this guy. And I'm interested in how personality disorders might change, or do they not change? I mean, has his diagnosis of the malignant narcissism, is that the kind of thing that, like dementia, can get worse over time? Or is that just fundamentally who he is?
Right. Well, it's certainly not true of all personality disorders. Some personality disorders, like, for example, borderline personality disorder, have a tendency to get better over time. But Eric Fromm said that malignant narcissists do get worse over time, especially if they have success. And he has dementia, which we know gets worse over time. And when you have dementia, it basically exaggerates all of the worst parts of whatever personality structure you had, because it's disinhibiting it, it's irritating it. So, you're more confused, you're more impulsive, you're more agitated, right? So whatever personality traits you had before just become more exaggerated. And I have an uncle who was like a yoga instructor and a past life regression therapist, a very enlightened man. He has dementia now, and my aunt's taking care of him at home. When I call, it's like he goes, "I love you, honey." He goes, "I love you too, honey, but take those underwear off. Oh, you don't need to wear that over your pants." So it's like he's always been a sweetie. He's still a sweetie. He's just confused. He's wearing his underpants outside his pants. But if somebody has a malignant personality like Trump, it's going to make him more. He's already impulsive, right? Because impulsivity is actually one aspect of malignant narcissism, because there's 4 components. There's narcissism, but there's also paranoia. There's antisocial or psychopathy, and sadism. Well, antisocial personality disorders, they're impulsive. So he's already impulsive, but people with dementia are impulsive. So now he's sort of impulsive on top of impulsive while being confused. And that's why, it's crazy stuff like Alcatraz, I'm in the movie business, let's make it a prison, or tariffs 500%, something pissed him off. I'm putting 500% tariffs on them,
Right. But the danger with this is that, people always use the nuclear codes as the example, but more specifically, the attacks on Yemen have been far greater than they should have ever been. And it's as if impulsively he just, go get them, doesn't matter the cost. Meanwhile, we've lost a couple of aircraft off the back of an aircraft carrier because of, the nature of this conflict that really should not be happening at this level. And so there is the fear that this is causing physical harm, death and destruction in far off places by nature of the fact that he's not able to manage his thoughts or these compulsions.
I think that the risk of some kind of international incident or war just because of his being a demented malignant narcissist is actually quite high. Because look, the world is an inherently unstable place, right? It really takes a lot of work for that we've done as a superpower to make it semi-stabilized,
Right.
But now you have someone who's really a loose cannon himself, right? In charge of all of this power. And unfortunately, again, there's something about this personality disorder that actually revels in destruction and chaos and terror. So that almost instinctively does the wrong thing. You know what I mean?
Well, like wanting to turn Gaza into a kind of Trump town. in itself looks like it's led to Netanyahu's recent announcement that he's going to take full control of the Gaza Strip. And so, again, if you want to join the dots, and you could potentially, I'm no expert on geopolitics, but you could potentially connect Donald Trump's behavior to the fighting between India and Pakistan, just by nature of how he destabilizes the world with his behavior.
I think that's right. There's almost a ripple effect, and in one of my sort of fantasy doomsday scenarios, the nuclear war breaks out between India and Pakistan, but just in part because we're not sort of there, kind of providing the buffer,
right.
That now old animosities are probably going to start breaking out again because people have learned, people used to say, "Oh, America, you think you're the world's policeman." Well, try a world without a policeman.
Yeah.
It's a much scarier place. And now
that the policeman
has gone rogue, and now that he's just basically formed his own gang, that means that the other, powers that may have been suppressed, right, are going to start asserting themselves, and old turf battles between nation states and ethnic groups are going to break out again. People are going to feel empowered to try their hand, right? Because they feel there isn't a restraining hand anymore.
And even the soft power of USAID, for example, Trump clearly didn't understand the ramifications of literally shutting and bolting the door on that department. I mean, we saw them taking the letters off of the above the doorway, and yet that is responsible for a huge kind of upset around the world, and it's China that's going to fill in the gaps.
Absolutely.
When it comes to that work.
Absolutely. Well, they look more stable and reliable than we do right now.
Yeah.
He's really, when you talk about soft power, people don't really appreciate how much money, how much our lifestyle is basically cushioned by this soft power. Everybody wants to come here. Everybody comes here as tourists and spends money. They come to get educated here and spend money. The best and the brightest stay here and make money or do whatever they do. And so immigration actually is the secret to our wealth. That's what my first book, The Hypomanic Edge, was about. That the nature of capitalism is such that the entrepreneurial temperament basically is a mildly hypomanic temperament. And actually, we see this mildly hypomanic temperament in immigrants, who have the energy and the confidence and the imagination, the risk tolerance, and the get up and go to get up and come here. That's some extent inspired by a genetically temperament that they then pass on to their descendants. And the countries that are the highest in new company creation per capita in order are America, Canada, Israel, and Australia, all nations of immigrants. Europe's in the middle, and actually, believe it or not, Asia's at the bottom because no one immigrates into Asia. So, and the rates of bipolar disorder follow the exact same curve. So, by the way, so immigration is the secret to our wealth. These high energy, ambitious immigrants, whatever way they come in, or whatever place in the ladder they're on, they're actually part of our economy. But the other thing is that our soft power also makes people want to buy our products. It also, but here's the real thing people don't understand. It makes them want to buy our bonds, okay, and hold their assets in dollars. And what people don't understand is the good faith and credit of the United States is allowing us to float on a sea of debt, because the safest investment in the world is a U.S. Treasury bond. Except that if America is looking unstable, it's not going to be the safest investment anymore. And people may not want to keep their money in dollars. When the stock market went down, the bond market's supposed to go up because people are seeking a safe haven. Instead, the bond market went down too. And that's actually when Trump backed off for his 90-day pause on the tariffs when that happened, because people freaked out. Because I didn't understand this, but most people probably don't understand this. If the 10-year bond, the price goes down, then the interest rate goes up, which means that's the interest rate we, as the United States of America, actually pay every month, like a mortgage. We actually take out a checkbook. We actually write a check every month, right, for that interest. Okay, we're paying that interest, okay? And so if we're borrowing trillions of dollars and we go up a point or two, then we're losing hundreds of billions of dollars just in interest. But that's what third world nations have to pay for their bonds. If you're going to buy bonds in a shaky country, they're going to have to offer you 11%. They can't give you 4%. So what he's really doing with our soft power is he's breaking us in the most fundamental way. The American dream is dead. People aren't, the best and the brightest aren't going to want to come here and bring their energy and their exuberance and their and the capital isn't going to flow here. And people are buying German.
He's relying on the $5 million gold card with his face on it, which he's willing to sell to Russian oligarchs to kind of get eventual citizenship in the US. I mean, the contradiction about immigration is ever present. Aside from the fact that his family are immigrants, his wife is an immigrant, his in-laws are immigrants. I mean, it's so unfortunate. But it's also history repeating itself. And this is what people now are starting finally to talk about, is the parallels with 1930s Germany and how, at the end of the day, the collective authority are white supremacist Nazis.
Yes.
And, anybody who doesn't look like them or behave in the way that they want is now fair game.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, we've been saying this for, almost 10 years now, but, the diagnosis of malignant narcissism historically was introduced by Erich Fromm, who himself escaped the Nazis. And it was his attempt to explain the psychology of Hitler, but believing that Hitler was a type, that he wasn't a one-off, right? That he was maybe the worst example or the most severe example, but of a type of leader who has these 4 traits that we talked about. And so the parallels between not only could you have foretold, I did foretell that if this personality had absolute power, he would transform society to look like 1930s Germany because he has the same personality structure as Hitler. So it's just a logical, prediction. Right. And it's coming to pass exactly in that way. And actually almost as quickly. That's the other amazing thing. I mean, Hitler collapsed democracy in 53 days. 100 days in, he seems like he's halfway there.
People can't make the connection with Hitler, or some people can't make the connection with Hitler, I guess, because they see Hitler, they see the Holocaust, they see the murder of 6 million Jews and 6 million minority groups, and they're not seeing that from Donald Trump. The point I try to make is that it didn't start with the Holocaust. It started with Hitler being elected as chancellor because interest rates were too high. And, we find ourselves in a similar situation. We have to draw the comparison with Germany in 1932 rather than in 1939 and beyond. And it's hard for people to kind of get that if they don't know their history.
No, absolutely, and actually, we've had guests on who are students of that history, and really taking us through it step by step. How there really is a playbook, and how he really is following it. And you're right, concentration camps. That's not step one, right? It's things like trying to purge the bureaucracy. And get business interests to play ball and basically suspend the power of the legislature. He did it with the Reichstag fire. Trump just had to call Mikey Johnson, and little Mikey Johnson will do whatever he wants. So they're just surrendering their power. They're just abdicating their power. But that's another thing. The other thing is to threaten the press. And try to neuter the press. The other thing is to try to take over and corrupt the justice system. And they're putting pressure on the justice system all these ways, threatening to impeach them, actually sticking the mob judges. And then recently arresting a judge. Right?
So Hannah Duggan arrested recently. I mean, this again was another Rubicon to cross, wasn't it? It's another moment where the alarm bells really need to sound. And yet, because there is so much drama coming out of the White House every hour and every day, that story lasted 48 hours.
Right, but there's another box to check. And by the way, what are these people being arrested for? You said we're not at the concentration camps yet. We are heading there, okay? And it's a pretty straight line, okay? So first of all, we see how brutal and how random and how arbitrary so many of these pickups have been, how irregular, people with black masks, picking up the wrong people, breaking into the wrong houses, and people without due process being sent to, gulags and, basically camps prisons where they probably will die.
Yes.
Or spend the rest of their lives without any due process. So they're already developing these police state tactics against all kinds of people. But what they're also now starting to do is threaten the judges and the elected officials. You better play ball in helping us round up these people, right? Or you're obstructing, our work, and then you're criminal, because that's what she was accused of, right? They came into her courtroom to arrest an immigrant who was being tried in her courtroom. She says, basically, get the hell out of here. This is my courtroom. Yeah. You're interrupting a judicial procedure. You ICE people go wait in the office, and then after the trial, he just told the person, listen, you go out the side door. And They actually had no trouble finding the person.
Right.
But the point is, they arrested her for not assisting. Okay, for not interrupting her trial to assist them in apprehending. So, first they round up the Jews, but then they start rounding up people who won't help round up the Jews. If you're not on the team persecuting the minority, right, or assisting them, and now they have a tip line where you can call in. So any of your neighbors can hear your accent and decide to call ICE that you should be checked out. So that making us kind of like East Germany, where we have people spying on our own, citizens.
Right.
So these are a series
the secret police, the Stasi, and all of these kind of additional tactics that are used to, surprise people. I mean, there's always a camera whenever they are apprehending or disappearing or kidnapping people. It's always on camera, and they want that, don't they? They want to use the visual propaganda as a deterrent.
Right, it's on TikTok. I mean, if you're on TikTok, it's all these people, taking cell phone videos of their mothers being taken away, of their car windows being smashed in. So it's, and the thing is, the point is, that famous poem about, when they came for the communists, I said nothing because I wasn't a communist. When they came for the Jews, I said nothing because I wasn't a Jew. When they came for the intellectuals, I said nothing because I wasn't an intellectual. And then when they came for me, there was no one left to say anything. The circle of who they're coming after is widening, so now they're actually going after green card members if they don't like what's on their phones, or, if they've protested or they've written in their social media, they're advocating a pro-Palestinian point of view, which is their right to do. Right. That's free speech. And
a lot of this is under the guise of preventing anti-Semitism. But that is a misnomer too, isn't it? Because this is the most anti-Semitic authority that we've ever had. And how long do you think that's going to last, this kind of fake claim of we are saving and protecting the Jews from Arabs who have a differing opinion about the Palestinians? I mean, this is as I see it, this is a kind of temporary excuse to round people
totally. up. I want to quote Governor Pritzker, who said, look, stop destroying the Constitution in the name of my ancestors.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's ironic because they're white supremacists. So they really don't care about anti-Semitism, but it's a cudgel they're using, right? Because they can attack the universities with it. Right, because they tolerated protests, right? So now all of them are they're using this fake cudgel of anti-Semitism as a way of actually trying to destroy academic freedom and take over the universities, which is also in the playbook. But what I was going to say about the concentration camps is he's now opening a prison in Libya. He wants to open prisons, these foreign prisons. These are concentration camps. If you get thrown into a prison in El Salvador, I mean, you're going to die there.
Home. Yeah.
You're never coming home.
This is what we're seeing with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who, they even photoshopped MS-13 on his knuckles and used that as propaganda, and then doubled down on it in the ABC interview. And even, despite it being so blatant and so obvious to anybody and everybody, including photos of him without that on his knuckles, of course. But even that is not good enough for them, because at the end of the day, the idea is to round up brown people no matter what the allegation of a crime.
Yeah. white and dissidents, and people who have the wrong, aren't loyal party members, who don't revere the dear leader.
Yes.
We're really sort of heading in that direction. But the point is that these are death camps. He's setting them up now.
Yeah.
He's already done a pilot study. El Salvador was like that airplane of people that was like a pilot study. Literally, They went like pilot.
Well, Libya is probably cheaper than El Salvador. Apparently, El Salvador was $5 million. I mean, maybe he's got a better deal in Libya to send people there. And I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if it came down to that.
I'm sure it is cheaper, but also then they're in a black hole. There's no due process. You can't meet with your lawyer in prison in Libya. That's what's really frightening. In other words, if you were just imprisoning them, well, look, they could sue. They could, their lawyer could file a writ saying there was no probable cause. He's saying we don't need probable cause. We don't need to have a trial, and you don't need to be incarcerated in the United States where you can have any due process or recourse. You're just going to literally be disappeared into a death camp. I mean, that's really what we should call it, because you're going to die there. And now they're talking about doing that with American citizens. They asked him, well, would you sense it? Well, we got some really bad people here too, so homegrown bad people. Yeah. So in other words, people that without due process, you're going to throw into a death camp. Maybe they're bad people, or maybe they just, maybe they're bad podcasters.
Right. I mean, this is the irony of it, is that Trump is a felon. Trump himself has been convicted. Trump himself is, has been accused of some of the craziest crimes. Yeah. And yet the projection is such that he talks about bad hombres. I mean, there is absolutely no allegation against Gilmore.
Just projection again. You just have to learn that opposite speak.
Just flip everything.
Just flip it.
Yeah.
It works every time.
Yeah. And am I right in saying that the trajectory of the authoritarianism seems to be going in that direction too? Because, as you mentioned, we're just over 3-4 months into this administration, and they obviously wanted to get a whole bunch of stuff done within 100 days. There's a kind of precedent for that, but he doesn't seem to be slowing down. Now that he's given license to his henchmen to do all this work, and I'm sure that Stephen Miller is at the heart of a lot of these policies, that it's only going to get worse and become more dramatic. And there does seem to be a fear that because of the number of stories that come out each day, that there is the fear that we might start to normalize this behavior.
Well, I mean, this is we're sliding swiftly into autocracy. And just to support what you're saying, one of these corrupt actors, of course, is Pam Bondi. She's someone. The other would be Hegseth. The other would be Tulsi Gabbard. Well, he signed an executive order that asking the three of them to study and give him a recommendation as to how to provide more military support for local police. So military support for local police is military assets on the streets of our cities, right? Helping them round up these immigrants. Okay. So it's starting to inch towards martial law. Okay. It's talking about having, tanks on the street on Fifth Avenue.
That's what he wants, though, isn't it? I mean, he almost wants there to be so much protest that they can then call for the martial law and then just lock the whole country down. I mean,
but you see, he's not even waiting for the protests. He's saying that he wants to, because there's already a state of emergency. Didn't you know there's a state of emergency?
Apparently there is. It's something to do with Venezuela.
Aren't you aware that we've been invaded?
Yeah.
Okay. So on the basis of that alone, okay, he's saying that the local police essentially need military backup. They're as if the police are asking for military backup. They don't want the military in their cities, but it's all opposite speak again. What they're really trying to do is justify bringing military assets into blue cities, right? Yes. They want us to see the power of the military on our streets.
It was shocking enough when we heard that they were going to use the military at the southern border, because that's not what the military are for.
Right.
Now what you're saying is that by putting the military onto the streets all over the country, and again, I'm just getting to this kind of normalization of things where we get used to a story because the military now are at the southern border and have been working there. And so we're going to just kind of maybe get used to the fact that seeing tanks on the streets in America is normal.
Yeah, when I get on the subway in Grand Central Station, there'll be soldiers on the platform, and I'll just, get on the train and listen to my, phone, look at my phone.
Yeah. It's remarkable, really, isn't it, that we're even having to have this conversation in the way that we are. We have to take another break, but I want to come back and talk about the potential for something that I recognized as elder abuse, that Trump is really being used by the people around him and taken advantage of. We'll look into that and a whole lot more next. If you've ever searched your own name or address in Google, it's shocking to find how many results have your personal information. And it's not by chance. Data brokers and people search sites collect your personal information, your name, address, phone number, financial information, income, and hundreds of other records. They sell and share it publicly without your consent. But Incogni is here to put an end to that. It hunts down these unethical sites and gets your information removed from the places that expose your private data. You don't have to email anyone, fill out any forms, or jump through hoops. They handle the entire process for you. Incogni is also continuously monitoring to see if your data is put back onto these databases, requesting repeated removals. This way, keeping them off forever, so you get way less spam calls, spam emails, and get more peace of mind. And best of all, you can cancel any time, and they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can get it completely risk-free. Right now, you can get 60% off an annual plan by going to incogni.com and use code WEEKEND. That's incogni.com/weekend and use code WEEKEND at checkout. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Get 60% off an annual plan at incogni.com/weekend and use code WEEKEND at checkout. When the world eventually goes downhill, and let's be honest, it's not looking great right now, you know what the first thing I'm going to make sure I have with me? Not my friends or family, it's my cat, Shuby, and his favorite cat food, Smalls. This podcast is sponsored by Smalls, and if you're a listener to the show, you'll know that my cat, Shuby, cannot live without Smalls. To get 35% off plus additional 50% off your first order, head to smalls.com and use our promo code WEEKEND for a limited time only. Smalls cat food is protein-packed recipes made with preservative-free ingredients you'll find in your fridge, and it's delivered right to your door. That's why Cats.com named Smalls their best overall cat food. Still not a believer in Smalls? Forbes ranked Smalls the best overall cat food, while BuzzFeed said, "My cat went completely ballistic for this stuff." Smalls also has an amazing bunch of treats and snacks to add to your order. Shuby particularly loves the smooth fish kibbles. After switching to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported overall health improvements. That's a big deal. So what are you waiting for? Give your cat the food they deserve. For a limited time only, because you're a Weekend Show listener, you can get 35% off Smalls plus an additional 50% off your first order by using my code WEEKEND. That's an additional 50% off when you head to smalls.com and use promo code WEEKEND. Again, that's promo code WEEKEND for an additional 50% off your first order plus free shipping at smalls.com. One day it's cool, the next I'm sweating through my clothes. I realized it's time to switch things up, and Quince had exactly what I was looking for. Lighter layers, better fabrics, and prices that don't make you think twice. The best part, everything with Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than you'd find at similar brands. By working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middleman, Quince gives you luxury pieces without the crazy markups. And Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. My Quince black t-shirts are my go-to every day, unless I'm in formal wear. Elevate your closet with Quince. Go to quince.com/weekend for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/weekend to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/weekend. Welcome back. It's The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. We're joined by Dr. John Gartner. John, I noticed when Trump was in the Oval Office and Elon Musk was doing that thing, dressed in his dark Gothic MAGA inappropriate clothing for the Oval Office, but got away with it, unlike Volodymyr Zelensky. I also noticed, during a lot of these executive order signings, where they're kind of telling him what he's signing, and he doesn't appear to really know what they are, and then he paraphrases what they just said, pretending that he knows what it is, but he's inaccurate invariably. Then he does the signature, the famous signature, which is the only real consistent thing about him, is the use of the Sharpie. And it occurred to me that, if we were in a family and that our elder was behaving in that way, that we would get them the help that they needed and put them into residential care and all of the things that you would normally do with someone who was presenting in this way. But the term elder abuse is not used that often in certainly in journalism to describe the leader of the formerly free world. And yet it seems clear to me that a lot of his enablers are taking advantage of the fact that he doesn't really know what's going on. And when he was deferring to the lawyers and regarding the Constitution, and I don't really know, but that to me exposed the fact that this is an abuse of power by the people around him. And really the 25th Amendment would be much more useful for the sake of everybody in this moment. But actually, they're just, pushing on regardless.
Well, the phrase that comes to mind, I don't mean to be too cheeky, but is you can't rape the willing. I think Trump is very willing to be exploited by these people because actually he's getting something out of these deals. All of these corrupt deals are profiting him. So he loves to monetize the presidency in all of these creative ways. I mean, look at the whole crypto grift. It's like, yeah, sure. I'm sure Elon Musk is getting all kinds of sweetheart contracts and he's removing all the regulations on his own companies. But meanwhile, he's made Trump a multi-billionaire in crypto. You know what I mean? So he's along for the ride. You know what I mean? Now it's like, as Christopher Murphy said, it's as if they put a Cash App, Trump's Cash App on the White House Gov page. Anybody can buy Trump coin, right, to curry favor with Trump. So it's like basically it's graphed at a level, enabled by technology. It's graphed at a level that we've literally never seen before, that anybody can contribute tens or hundreds of millions of dollars directly into the pocket of the president of the United States to curry favor. And he's most willing to do that, so it's really quite I feel sorry for young people who don't really know the old United States of America. But that was one thing that, surprisingly, we've had surprisingly few financial scandals involving presidents themselves. Teapot Dome or, Grant had people around him that were crooked because he picked the wrong cronies or friends to put in power, whatever. But we really have had presidents who put the interest of the country first, even if they had differing, views. And really that there was this quaint idea that you should not only not have foreign emoluments, which as it turns out was actually a pretty important aspect to put in the Constitution. It was one of the first things they put in there. But also to try to be above even the appearance of improperty, of trying to profit yourself. In fact, you're not even supposed to accept these foreign gifts. I remember there was some argument about whether the president could accept this $1,000 bottle of aged whiskey,
right,
from, and finally the president, damn it, I'm keeping the whiskey,
Yeah. Well, the question was put in the White House press room last week to Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, and said, about the meme coin and about the fact that foreign dignitaries are currying favor and they are buying it. And he has become billions of dollars richer because of it. And her answer was, well, he is a great businessman. And that's why the American people voted for him. And what do you expect? And it was really a kind of not just an abuse of power, but it was really exposing the kind of capitalist nature of America laid bare. I mean, we really now are at a point where it's every man for himself.
Well, it's just that what's sad is we don't have a history of presidential corruption. And this is the most naked presidential corruption on a scale literally never seen before. We just didn't,
right,
until we had, electronic money, you just couldn't even shovel this much money at the potentate,
Yeah.
at one time.
And you can't trace it. I mean, the other thing with the crypto is that
right,
it's all hidden. And so this is the perfect foil for him, isn't it? Do you
Well,
think that?
yeah,
Go on.
exactly. No, I was just going to say the problem with corruption, right, is there's always a paper trail. That's how people get caught, right?
Right.
But the thing is they found the perfect method to have no paper trail. So it is really the perfect corruption device for the perfectly corrupt president.
Do you think that the timing of him becoming president at the age of 78 and the dementia combined with the personality disorder and the fact that he's clearly slowing down is in a way contributing to the dictatorship, because he is delegating now to people who are far more dangerous than him? Even his vice president has much more extreme and very specific views linked to that far-right kind of Christian nationalism, the Project 2025 stuff. I mean, he famously went to the Munich Security Conference and told them that the Germans need to be more welcoming of far-right parties and, supporting the AfD. And Pete Hegseth did a similar thing at the NATO meeting. And so, in a way, Trump's laziness is giving the opportunity for these others who normally might defer to the president. There is no president to defer to because he's either asleep or he's playing golf.
Right. No, it's really the worst of both worlds. It's a kakistocracy, that means, rule by the worst. He's literally picked the absolute worst people, So for the Surgeon General, we have someone who couldn't even pass their own residency, someone who any doctor would regard as a failure, even just as like a run-of-the-mill, Main Street doctor is now the chief doctor, a health nut. RFK is now, in charge of Health and Human Services.
Conspiracy theorists, and
a white nationalist conspiracy theorist who's never run a 2-car parade, who has a drinking problem, and is just, testosterone pumped to, get the bad, woke people, in charge of the military, and who's totally incompetent, sending out things. But the choosing of these people is actually part of how it works. But then what he's also doing is he's unleashing them. So he's taking these people with extreme crazy views and who are dysregulated and discontrolled, right, and out of control, and he's giving them control. He's just throwing them the keys. Like, here you go. When someone asked him about, why are you nominating for Surgeon General someone who's never practiced, a doctor who doesn't have a medical license, actually, or doesn't have pass a residency? RFK liked her. In other words, he didn't look at her, right? Bobby liked her. In other words, he doesn't give a shit about how well America's run. So he's happy to delegate all this stuff. Like he said, he's lazy. He doesn't really understand it anyway. He just wants to play golf. So yeah, fine. He'll just I'll pick the worst people and let them make the decisions.
Do you see us coming back from this? Because, it's a bit of a doomsday conversation, but kind of hear me out, because once you break the norms, to rebuild them takes much longer. It's very quick and easy to smash things up, but actually putting it back together can take generations. And that's what he's done with our institutions. They've now been broken, as it appears, for good. And then some people are of the opinion that Republicans will never give way in future elections, with the voter suppression and the various methods that they now have, that this is the authoritarian government that we have certainly in the short to medium term or indefinitely. How do we come back from this?
It's a great question. It's one I contemplate a lot. It's one we talk about a lot on the show. I think what's scary is I don't think that many of us really see a clear path back. And I think that is what's scary. That doesn't mean there isn't one. They're not the same thing. History is full of surprises, right? No one thought that, people, a group of shipyard workers in Poland were going to, bring down the government. You know what I mean? So things have a way of happening, right? But right now, it just feels like we're like Thelma and Louise. We've just gone over the cliff, and I wonder what's going to happen
so
now.
Bleak. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I have faith in the power of people and the collective power of protest, but it's as I understand it, we really almost need a new movement, a new political movement to be able to take this on, because the Democrats are so steeped in the old way of doing things, and because the institutions don't exist anymore, that you can't really go back to that. So maybe something new. Do you think, as a collective, the American people have the tools to be able to do that?
The tools to be able to come back, you mean, to protest in such a way that they can bring about
the strength to be able to do it, because I do feel that Americans work so hard and there's very little let up. We get so few days off compared to our European friends, and really, even to go protest, it's like you might have to leave your job in order to be able to do what needs to be done. And I worry that the American people are so focused on paying the bills that actually, the fall of democracy plays second fiddle to putting food on the table.
Someone wrote a memoir about World War II, saying about we ate well during the war, and it was about normal life, while all of the destruction was going on. I think your fear is well founded. There is a lot of action in the streets. I think that it's going to accelerate, and I think that is kind of one of our hopes. That resistance in the streets. At this point, it has come down to the people, but they've also shown themselves to be very impervious to that kind of protest. And may even be wanting to use it as an excuse to declare martial law. And I think the real thing I'm worried about is the free and fair elections. I think that we should take the midterms, obviously, given how dissatisfied people are. But I worry about them monkeying with really the nuts and bolts of the electoral system. And they seem to be looking for any way to monkey with it. And I worry even if Starlink was somehow involved in determining the presidential election. And that sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory, and it is, because I have no evidence. But I just have this. They're looking for any. We do know that. The in Arizona and Colorado, right? They broke into the machine. They did it in front of everybody with the cyber ninjas in Arizona.
There's a distrust, is what you're saying. And the moment you have
an attempt to actually manipulate the system to get into the guts of the thing, to basically to skew it. They're looking to rig the election. Again, opposite speak. They're looking for ways. That's why Tina Peters is in jail now, because she tried to get the software, for the voting machines, using her position as clerk administrator of the elections, right? She managed to give a back door to this group. Who knows? They might have been working with Russia. Who knows? And so I'm just saying that it's voter suppression. You mentioned that. But there's lots of ways in which I think they're going to try to suppress the vote. And do we really think that J.D. Vance is going to announce in the Senate that a Democrat has won the presidency, 4 years from now? I'm very concerned that, we may not realize it, but we may already be dead men walking. I mean, that is it's not a definite thing, but it's a real possibility.
Because it's a coup, ultimately. What we are living through now is a coup from the inside and in plain sight. And so it isn't really there is no normal here. It's not an administration. It's a regime that is born of a coup. And so they will never relinquish power.
Right, they'll never voluntarily relinquish power. Exactly. I mean, I said that about Trump actually 2 years before January 6th. Actually, I said he will never voluntarily relinquish power, because name me a malignant narcissist in history who has ever voluntarily, relinquished power. It's like if you've seen the play Hamilton. King George was so amazed that Washington could give up power. I didn't know that was something you could do. That's a line from the play. But yes, that's something that we normally do. But they don't. But you're right. Now we have a whole regime that doesn't want to give up power. So in one sense, January 6th was kind of a warm-up, right? One idiot basically telling people on Twitter, come to Washington, it'll be wild, and sparking some kind of stupid riot that got, out of hand and almost got the vice president killed, I guess.
Yeah.
But now you have the whole power of the state, right?
Well, by nature of hardening all of the rioters, that really is giving license to everybody behaving like that. And he's even looking at kind of reparations now and giving $30 million to the family of Ashley Babbitt, who died in the siege. I mean, that really is telling his personal militia that
Right.
this is how protected you are when we need you going forward.
Well, and there's a whole militia element too, to people being terrorized, judges being terrorized, pizzas and death threats and things like that. So there's that whole militia, but also, look, we have in Hitler's case, right? First there was the beer hall pushed, right? And that was sort of like an ill-advised, pathetic attempt to take over the government that never really had no chance. That's sort of what January 6th was. It was almost performative, right? They
and Hitler went to jail for that.
And Hitler went to jail for that. It's kind of amazing. Trump should have gone to jail, but maybe if go by those standards, Trump could have gone to jail, served his term, and then come in and elected president. But now, you see, now that he has the power of the state, it can be the real thing, right? Yeah. There's so many different ways, right, that they can, using the power of the state, refuse to certify the election or distort the results or, use fake electors. I mean, the imagination, it's a failure of imagination right now that we can't think of all the different ways that the state could use their power to prevent, to not allow themselves to go out of power.
Finally, John, a lot of people are very scared right now, not least immigrants, legal or not least naturalized citizens, people of color, trans people, gay people, and women as well. Very scared.
Yes.
I want to reference the Roosevelt quote, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." How much of the propaganda, how much of this authoritarian movement is relying on people to self-censor because they are scared, rather than what is actually happening? Because obviously the media repeats a lot of these stories about people being detained at airports and various things. But when you get into the nuts and bolts of it, they don't report on the tens of millions of people who are transiting the airport normally. So you are relying on those stories as a kind of scare tactic. So is it for people to fear the regime or fear the fear?
It's an excellent point, and I think people really do need to sort of take a breath and kind of take that in. The way they operate is by inspiring fear, and everybody then, as you say, self-censoring, surrendering in advance, and that's what they want us to do, and that is actually their most effective technique. But unfortunately, I also think that is human nature. I think that is just statistically what most people will do and do. So we can, preach and say, don't do that, and try to channel FDR in some way to hopefully rally the troops. And I'm behind you with that. Obviously, I'm continuing my podcast like you're continuing your podcast, and we have reason to fear. So we're trying not to let the fear control us, control our behavior. But I don't know if you've had this experience, but I've had many guests refuse to come on the show. I had people cancel who were scheduled to be on the show because they became intimidated. They self-censored. They took themselves off the roster. And that's just a small example, but, I see it in all kinds of ways. People saying that, they don't want to talk anything bad about the government when they're at work, whatever their job is. There's a lot of ways in which people are what they're relying on is human nature, which is people do try to avoid danger. We've evolved to do that. Yes. And also we've evolved to socially conform because we know that actually our survival is dependent on being part of a group. So when a malignant narcissist is able to take control of society, Robert J. Lifton wrote about this, right? Then he creates something called malignant normality, where now the malignant ideology becomes the state ideology or the conventional wisdom. And now to fit into society, right, you have to Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler. If someone says Heil Hitler, do you say Heil Hitler? You know what I mean? You don't want to not be part of the group. It's funny. I'm really like a not part of the group guy. So I actually went to Princeton, and I was at this eating club, and there was like a group of it was a gathering of Princetonians, and they started singing the school song. And it's like, "Hooray for old Nassau, my boy!" Hooray. And I wasn't doing it. So it was like 40 people were doing this, and I was just standing there. My wife said, "There's something wrong with you. Yeah. Everyone else is doing this. Why aren't you doing it?" I said, "I don't know. I just didn't want to." But so there'll always be some people who will be, contrary. But the natural human instinct is to fit into the group. and to not take risks. So it's actually a dual thing. You want to be part of the group, you want to blend in, and you don't want to be seen as an enemy of the group.
So there is a level of compliance that the Trump regime is relying on, and that human nature just by osmosis plays into.
Exactly.
Okay. We have to finish, but I'm so grateful to you for your expertise. Dr. John Gartner, thanks for joining the Weekend Show.
I really enjoyed it. Good talking to you.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News or by joining the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.